Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Morton. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the artist and studio manager here at Baltimore Clayworks. We are thrilled that you all have joined us. I would like to acknowledge that I am joining from my office located on Piscataway and Susquehannock land, currently known as Baltimore, Maryland. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual artist talk given today by Blaise DePaolo. Blaise DePaolo earned her MFA in ceramic sculpture with a minor in glass from the Rochester Institute of Technology, School of American Craft in 1997. DePaolo is the Associate Professor of Sculpture at Morgan State University, an historical Black college or university. She did her undergraduate work at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, an alternative liberal arts college with a focus on experimental education. Her travels to Mexico and Guatemala, touring Mayan ruin sites, have been a defining influence on her work. She has worked in numerous public and private collections and identifies herself as a professor and community artist. In partnership with Baltimore City Public Schools and art organizations, DePaolo has collaborated on numerous public art projects with her Morgan students in underserved communities. Some installations include Healthcare for the Homeless, Everyone Deserves to Go Home, Mural Loyal University Center for Civic Engagement and Social Justice, League for the People with Disabilities, and the Grow Justice Mural for the Pensacola Jewish Community Center in Foster City, California. For more information about our artist talks, please visit our virtual library at baltimoreclayworks.org. I will now turn it over to Blaise.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction. And thank you so much for everyone who's tuning in today. Thanks to Matt Heilich for the invitation to share my work with you. I've been involved with Baltimore Clayworks in one way or another since 1991. And over the years, I have worn many hats. I began as the Clayworks supply manager, driving thousands of pounds of clay in a great big old Chevy around Baltimore with Kevin Cummings, all the way from that to doing a stint over a summer as the interim director. Probably the most impactful experience, however, was when I held the position of community arts programmer. And I'll talk a good bit about that in the lecture. So where I wanted to start today was with the work that I've done through grant-funded projects at Baltimore Clayworks. And so if you don't know me personally, you may be familiar with my benches. These benches were funded with a grant from the TKF Foundation. Their mission is to put beautiful urban sacred spaces together for people who live in urban environments. On the benches, I used a series of glazes I've been developing for a number of years now. I probably should start giving Peter Pinnell royalties for his bronze green glaze that I'm using here on the leaves. Working on a grant for the TKF Foundation was perfect for me because not only do they try and create sacred spaces, which is something I'm very interested in my travels. I've gone to many sacred spaces throughout the world, Stonehenge, and then I've visited every Mayan ruin site in Mexico and Guatemala I could get myself to. And so that was a perfect match. Aesthetically, I'm always trying to bring something of the sacred and the beautiful into my work. And the way I'm talking about beauty is really in the sublime sense of beauty, the kind of beauty that can sort of transcend the physical and its myriad of miseries and take us into the spiritual and into that place of peace. Tall order, certainly in the world that we live in. From there, I went on around the same period of time. I was doing a lot of kind of monolithic work. Around that period of time, I was commissioned to do a donor wall for what was at that time the new healthcare for the homeless. And that was a fantastic experience. I was involved in this project in a couple of different ways. In that, at the same time, I was working with the contractors and designing the donor wall and doing the research involved in that. My students were working with muralist J. Wolf Schlossberg Cohen, who was commissioned to do the enormous painted mural on the outside of the building. So when I get to the part of my talk where I'm talking about my community engaged work, I'll go back to the Healthcare for the Homeless project and show you a little bit of that. But this project was incredibly satisfying and very enlightening. It was one of those many, many moments I've had as a community artist where you're saying to yourself, but for the grace of God, there go I. The organization is extraordinary. They have been providing free medical health services to the unhoused, individuals and entire families for many, many, many years. I'm sorry to say that since creating this mural, there are even more unhoused people in the country, if you can believe that. I did a whole lot of work for them at that time, besides the donor wall. I made about 30 individual plaques. The technical complication of this particular project was that it was just would not have been feasible to hand stamp all of the donor names. The donor names had to be in 3 different sizes to indicate at what level the donor was coming in on. I found a company in California that could print all of the names the way I needed them to, so that I would only have a small amount of freehanding to do. So in this instance, I'm the art room. I did freehand, but everything else, everything else came from one of the stamps that the company made for me. So that was great, except for the fact that that winter, Baltimore had an unbelievable snowstorm. They got stuck in a trailer for 10 days, and they pushed the project on my end perilously close to the opening of the building. So none of these projects have been without their catastrophes, that's for sure. Maybe this one was. This is another instance. This is at Loyola University. And this is an instance where it just comes in so handy to be working in close collaboration with the people who are designing the spaces, so that I could really integrate the work with the surrounding. I'm always going for something that looks like it was kind of grown on location rather than hung on the wall. And then finally, just to kind of wrap up the public art work, this was a piece I did for the Creative Alliance. And I did this in combination, or in collaboration rather, with Emily R. Rothschild, Emily Rothschild's daughter. And she was marvelous to work with. She took me into Emily's studio, and I was able to look at all of her different beautiful sculptural work. Meanwhile, back at Healthcare for the Homeless, and closer to the present day, advancing a little bit on the timeline, probably the most significant work I feel I've done as a professor at Morgan is to write 2 community art classes and involve my students in my passion of trying to reach underserved communities with my artwork. I have Deborah Bedwell to thank for showing me what that looked like, and for really training me in how to use my craft to bring in others, and to, not to sound terribly dramatic, but to kind of save lives with clay, if you will. The only kind of thing I saw missing was enough Black representation in our community programs. And so when I got to Clayworks, I thought, wow, what a great thing to do. If I can write these courses and they can make it through the whole vetting process and I can teach them, then I will have ample interns of color to put in front of kids of color all over Baltimore so that they can see themselves. And I never ever have to give another lecture to a kid about going to college. And so that's what I've done. I'm really super proud to say that many of my students have gone on to carve out careers for themselves in art and in community art. And I believe they are also changing lives because everybody does deserve to go home and everybody does deserve to have exposure to rigorous and powerful art experiences. Jay and I have worked on numerous projects with my students. In this project that was in Foster City, California at the Jewish Community Center, he had me create a component of the mural that was ceramic. So he does this wonderful workshop series where he will engage communities in creating artwork around themes. In this particular theme, it was the 5 pillars of Jewish faith. So I took the idea or the concept of 5 pillars and created pillars, if you will, to be in the ceramic, in the mosaic. It was an amazing project. It really involved a lot of people both in Baltimore with me. Under my direction, we created the mosaic. And then we sent it to Foster City, California. So what you're looking at now is a time lapse that was made. Jay got out to Foster City about a week before I did. And what you just saw was him mapping out the mural in the dark. He projects it and then traces over it. And you can see where my 5 pillars are sort of the blanks in the space. This is kind of long, so I'm just going to go over to the end of it. By now I'm there in California and I'm working on the tiles along with the crew that did all the tile setting and grouting. And what I just absolutely love about the time-lapse video is a clip at the very end. This little girl does something that I have done a million times in Mayan ruin sites, and that is she runs up to the clay and she just stretches her hands over the clay. That is exactly what I am going for when I create my work and also when I am in those sacred spaces. To me, they're very tactile. So fast forward now to some community art projects that I've done recently. Given the fact that the pandemic sort of created everyone in education to pivot, my community art class became just a little sticky in terms of being able to get folks to engage in spaces. So when the School of Public Health reached out to me to share what they were doing with their grant writing, and I met Alex Clunas, who was just in that last image, I took the opportunity to go a little outside of my comfort zone with my community art class and join up with Alex Clunas in his organic garden. When Alex started this garden years ago, it was a parking lot that had been made into a green space, and then he began planting the garden. As part of some of the events that we did over the course of the year that we had our engagement activity, we did an herb drying workshop with the kids. We did pot making workshops and planting. It was really pretty extraordinary, the things that we were able to do. And my students had an amazing time. I heard so many stories about grandma and what grandma planted in her garden back in the day, etc. It was pretty terrific. So all that color leads me into what I've done most recently with community art is I'm starting to branch out now and take my students on international service learning trips. It's incredibly wonderful. It speaks to that part of me that really never left Guatemala, in that I have been able to go back, but to go back to Guatemala, not just as a lone young person traveling, but now as a seasoned professor with young Morgan students, and to experience just the incredible beauty of the Mayan highlands. So we took lots and lots of different trips, and then I ran off for a day on my own to experience the Mayan village, pottery village. So here I am in Panajachel, catching the tuk-tuk up to the pottery villages. So in 2020, I was invited to work in this village and to do a residency. I'm sorry to say that the coronavirus completely interrupted that, and that the gentleman who invited me, this extraordinary man named Ken Edwards, passed away during the coronavirus. Now, he was 90 when I met him, so it wasn't terribly shocking that Ken wasn't around. I lost track of him during the time just because of the kind of sketchy internet service at the time. Things are much, much different now. And I did have enough of a networking event there that I know that I can begin to incorporate visits with my students to the potteries there. There are multiple potteries there. Ken actually retired to Guatemala after a very successful career. He began doing Conten ceramics in Guatemala. That was not a thing when Ken retired in his 70s, mind you. In the 20 years in his retirement, he taught a number of different families how to do ceramics. And in the time that he has been gone, they have completely taken over the business. They've branched out into other businesses. They now do everything in a slip cast kind of way. So throwing does still happen, but it's primarily now slip casting because they've grown huge. And now you can find their pottery not just all over Guatemala, but also all over the world. I was fortunate enough to happen upon a wonderful business in Pittsford, New York, where I ended up taking a leave of absence last semester. And they sell Maya Ken pottery. So I'm excited to share my slides with them and show them how extraordinary it is that this man who really tried to retire ended up creating an industry that now supports Guatemalan artists who are able to stay in country and carve out a living, which not all Guatemalan men have been able to do. Here I'm catching the taxi back, and we are going off onto our other events. This is more of what you would have seen for Mayan ceramics. However, I have to toggle around back to my talk now. However, there is now a whole new line of Mayan ceramics thanks to Maya Ken. And then I just want to wrap it up a little bit with some of the work I've been doing recently. After being so enthralled with large scale work for so long, I then became enamored with, and still am enamored with, these small scale bud vases, I call them, but really they're an homage to the garlic and the garlic clove. That's pretty much my inspiration. Again, nature and the colors from Guatemala. When I took a look at some work recently, I thought, oh yeah, absolutely, of course. And then the last little thing that I'll share with you is some work I've done. I bring students to Baltimore Clayworks routinely to fire, my ceramic students to fire in the wood kiln at least once a year for Fire Fest. And of course have become completely enamored with it myself. So this piece is one of my bud vases fired in the wood fire kiln. And this piece is one of my lanterns. My lanterns are all about wayfinding. I'm on a journey that I often describe through mosaic as a path, but these lanterns are meant to light up the journey. And so that kind of brings us full circle to the end of the presentation where I show you the piece, but then also the way in which the piece casts light in a dark room. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with my work. So thank you so much. I hope I've left a little bit of time should there be any questions. So thank you again, Rebecca, and I'll kind of hand it back to you now.